Hello, welcome to Our Heritage. We have a special guest today, Mr. Chris Trowell, well-known local historian. Thank you for coming today.
Glad to be here, Carol. I guess.
He guesses. He was coerced just a little bit. We're going today to talk about early Coffee County history. Mr. Trowell?
Well, you didn't define what you meant by early.
Well.
So I'll start a little early, okay?
Okay.
I'll go back about 10,000 years, and then for several tens of thousands of years before that. Southern Georgia during that time was a vast, dry, grassy plain. That's all. The only trees were a few scattered oaks. Winds from the west scooped up sand and piled it along the rivers and creeks, usually on the north and east side. And then about 10,000 years ago, the climate began to change. That's probably a little closer to the early that you were talking about. Sea level rose to its present level about 8,000 years ago, and the land moved in from Gray's Reef off the Georgia coast. The rains came. Southern Georgia was invaded by new species about this time, pines.
Ooh.
Millions and millions of pines. They also brought with them gopher tortoises and indigo snakes. They think they moved with the pines. Streams began to flow, watering trees and shrubs along their margins, and swamps formed. People came, trails developed crossing the area, and then about 2000 BC villages were settled along the rivers and near springs, and their artifacts can still be found. Herds of deer and flocks of birds, passenger pigeons and Carolina parakeets sustained these early settlements. Passenger pigeons flew in droves of millions. They'd break the limbs out of trees.
Really?
There were so many. My uncle killed 157 with one blast of a 10-gauge shotgun. He was a conservationist, I guess. Around 1600 AD, ships from Europe brought new settlers, new people, and they brought pigs. That's where the pigs came from. This was a new era. Georgia was settled first along the coast and then up the river basins. The coast and uplands were cleared. The hardwood trees were cut to make fences, and cotton fields were planted. The pine lands, however, of Coffee County, southern Georgia, were not settled until after 1800. Few of the people that settled in the piney woods grew cotton. They were herders, usually referred to as stock minders in those early years.
I've never heard that before. I never heard that.
You learn it every time.
Every time.
Okay. They managed herds of cattle, thousands of cattle, that grazed in the wiregrass beneath those trees. Spring roundups and cattle drives to Savannah or Tampa in the fall became important events in South Georgia. By the mid-1800s, great flocks of sheep began to wander across South Georgia landscape. By the 1870s, Coffee County was one of the largest sheep producers in the country. Many of them died, however, in the great freezes of the 1880s. Lots of them were killed by dogs. As a matter of fact, for in the 1880s and early 1890s, they offered rewards for people to ride through the woods and shoot dogs. They were killing lambs.
Wild dogs?
Well,
They're just feral.
the feral dogs, yeah. And wolves. They'd often have a wolf hunt too. By 1860, railroads were beginning to cross the area, and this began a major change of people and the land. The railroads brought very different people. The original counties of Appleton and Irwin were divided to form Telfair, then Coffee, Clinch, and Berrien County. Coffee was formed in 1854. In 1819 and 1825, Telfair County, that was formed just north of the river in 1807, had a hard time deciding where to put the courthouse. And so they, in turn, decided also something had to be done because it was sitting on the southern edge of the county.
Oh.
It was convenient for the river people, but not for the people in the upcountry. So they added the land south of the river as far as Broxton in 1819, and then they added the land below that for almost as south as Kirkland and Pearson. This was, of course, cut out when the county was formed and made part of the county. The small farmers and herders were challenged, however, by this time for the use of the land. The era of timber and turpentine began then. The wealthy businessmen, mainly from North Carolina and elsewhere, bought up or leased the timber. The trees were turpentined and then cut and sawed into boards with their sawmills. The landscape was slowly transformed into a forest of stumps. Trees grew up around some of the railroad sidings at the sawmills and the turpentine stills. And towns at that point came to control the area and what happened in the area. Now, do you have a question?
I sure do.
Uh-oh.
I always thought, and some people have mentioned it since then, that pine trees and turpentine built Coffee County. The money and the people that came with those two parts of industry changed the livelihood, the scenery, everything.
Well, part of that's accurate. It did change it. It changed the landscape, changed the people, but not because of the money. People did not make that much money from turpentine.
It wasn't a cash crop, was it?
It was a cash crop, but it wasn't that profitable.
Wow.
I'm not sure exactly why it wasn't that profitable, but it wasn't. The way we turpentine, by the way, changed significantly about 1900. Hurdy came down to Irwin County and he brought his...
We have some of those in the museum.
Right, and those are called Hurdy cups. Hurdy cups. They and so, well, he used them for about 4 or 5 years, and then they convinced a number of big turpentine operations to start using them. And that's when they stopped chopping the boxes in the bottom of the tree. Hurdy, by the way, was an interesting character. You know, he was the big baseball coach at University of Georgia.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And as a matter of fact, one of the athletic fields up there is named
Hurdy Field.
Right. And he taught chemistry. And he was he and a friend of his, or an enemy of somebody went with him to Germany because that's where the heart of the chemical industry was at the time. And so they were riding on the railroad in Germany, and when they stopped, the train ran off of the track. So they had to wait until they could get the train back on the track. So he went around and to the center of town, and they had a ball game going on. And Hurdy sat in the bleachers for a few minutes, and then he just couldn't take it, and he walked out on the field and took the bat from the hitter and immediately drove the ball right out of the park, which of course caused a great
story.
And by the way, he was at a beer garden. So
When it happened.
that's right.
Great for international relations.
Right.
Douglas was a settlement before that time, before 1854, wasn't it?
No,
No, it wasn't just a hole in the road.
it wasn't even much of a hole. When they created the county, they acquired 50 acres for a town site.
Oh, okay.
And the legend is over the years that they were given 50 acres. But from the courthouse records, they bought it. Not for much, but they paid for it.
I had a person from Nichols tell me that Nichols should have been the county seat of Coffee County.
Yes.
And I think that's where a lot of animosity has arisen.
Well, they wanted to be several times. In the 1880s, there was a major push to create to move the courthouse to Nichols. There was a major push at the same time, by the way, and create another county. Not
Coffee, but another
right.
one.
But they at about the same time, Mr. Kirkland, who was in the legislature at the time, introduced a resolution to move the courthouse from here to Kirkland. You know where Kirkland?
I know where Kirkland is.
That's right.
It's south of here.
That's right.
A bit.
I remember it was a much more prosperous town.
Oh, yeah.
In my first encounter with Kirkland, I was driving along the road and I looked out there, and there was the old courthouse, the old school. And one thing was it was full of chickens as students, so there must have been like 2,000 or 3,000 chickens in the schoolhouse.
In the schoolhouse. Oh, amazing. Well, didn't the railroad run through Kirkland or near Kirkland?
Oh, yeah,
there?
right. That was the reason, yeah. And Pearson had really not developed very much by the 1880s.
Okay.
Nor had Willacoochee, but both of them had developed by that time.
Right, by that time. Okay. We're celebrating the Coffee County Centennial. When we go back, excuse me, I'm stuttering a little bit, but there were so many communities in Coffee County at that time, and most of them were like Sap Steel or Phillips Mill and all this. So I assume they were around a turpentine mill.
Most of them had a turpentine steel, yes.
And some of them developed into towns.
Yes. They were really at a railroad siding, which is why the steel was there.
Yeah. But the railroads facilitated the growth of the pine and turpentine business.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they're hand in hand.
Oh, they had a major department in the railroad to promote agriculture and anything else that would make money.
Right. I know that West Green, there was a house was built, a little farm, and it was to lure people to buy land in West Green and farms and show them how plentiful and wonderful it all was. And I'm assuming that all the railroads at some time had something of that venue.
Right. They had, I noticed a newspaper article the other day where a group of South Carolinians had migrated down, it seemed like around Denton, in 4 covered wagons.
Ooh.